I was in a job interview where they asked me if I had any medical issues or if I had children. Is that legal? And what should I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for sending that in. And I'd be curious to know when this happened. And I guess the next question is, were you hired? Is it legal? I mean, it's completely inappropriate. It's exactly what we tell our clients, our employer clients, never to do. You never want to ask about things like religion, age, children, disability, anything protected by human rights legislation. And the reality is, even when you hire the person, there's no reason to ask most of these questions. Even things like age. We always tell our clients, and when I've done my hiring personally, I don't know how old the applicants are. Obviously, I can make somewhat of an educated guess, but I will never ask. And the only reason I'll ask for their date of birth if they're hired is for purposes of benefits and things like that. Otherwise, there's no reason to ask even after the person has the job. So if you were asked these questions during an interview, and if presumably you didn't get the job, it is obviously this inference that might have been a factor in the decision not to hire you, which is exactly what human rights legislation is designed for. We have human rights legislation in every jurisdiction in Canada, which says you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of certain grounds. It doesn't cover every ground. So you can have, discrimination, which discrimination in and of itself is not a bad thing. As I often say to our employer clients, you should be discriminating in favor of the best candidate. You should be discriminating in favor of the candidate who has the best experience or the best education, etc. There's nothing unlawful about that. You can't discriminate on the basis of protected grounds, traditionally disadvantaged grounds like race, ethnicity, disability, family status, etc. The challenge, and I should actually add one caveat to that, if there is a bona fide occupational requirement, then you can discriminate. So best example is probably firefighters. Most firefighter positions are going to have a certain mobility requirement. So in that case, you may be able to discriminate against someone who has a disability if it impacts their ability to do their job. Putting aside bona fide occupational requirements, which are very hard to prove, by the way, the onus is on the employer to show it is truly bona fide. Putting that aside, the question becomes an issue of proof. So if you were in an interview and you were asked about your medical conditions or your children, and you were then not hired, the inference is that you were not hired because of those. But can you prove it? And one thing to remember here is that this is what our human rights tribunals are designed to address. It's this type of situation. And we have worked with dozens, I guess probably hundreds of individuals who've had situations like that, either in a hiring situation, a termination situation, or an accommodation situation where they're being discriminated against, or they think they're being discriminated against on the basis of protected grounds. It's all going to come down to proof. So first of all, you know what happened in that interview, and the interviewer knows what happened. No one else really does. So every decision that is made in a court, in a tribunal, is based upon the evidence. So first of all, you're going to have to be confident that you can satisfy a tribunal that this is what happened. Bearing in mind, this is not like what we watch on TV. It's not the beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard of proof is a balance of probabilities. In other words, to put it simply, what is more likely than not? There is very rarely a smoking gun in these cases. Unless you can, subpoena your file, and on the application there's a handwritten note that says, do not hire has small children. That's never going to happen. The reality is that you're going to be relying upon circumstantial evidence, which is A, you're going to have to prove that they ask you these questions. B, you're going to prove that you weren't hired, which should not be difficult. And then the tribunal or a court is going to be asked to make that inference and say there must have been a connection there. And practically speaking, the onus is now going to shift to the employer to prove that there were other reasons why they didn't hire you. And when we work with employers in these situations, the first thing I'll say is, okay, well, this is the situation. Forget it for a moment whether you asked the person or not these questions. Why didn't you hire them? What's on the file? And if the file says, well, we didn't hire this person because they only had an undergraduate degree and we needed a master's, or they didn't have any relevant industry experience, that's going to be their defense, to say the decision not to hire the person had nothing to do with medical condition, nothing to do with the fact they had children. It was based upon their qualifications or the lack of qualifications. And at the end of the day, a tribunal is going to make a decision as to whether they believe them or not. And if they don't believe them, then you'll be entitled to compensation. And generally speaking, for human rights claims like this, there's two types of compensation. There is what we usually call general damages, or damages for injury to your dignity and sense of self-respect, which frankly have been historically nominal in Canada. We're talking about $5, $10, $15,000. Nothing substantial, but still better than nothing. And the numbers are going up. The other type of compensation is lost wages. So if you can prove that you didn't get the job because of the fact that you had a medical condition or had children, then you can also get lost wages for the wages you would have earned in that job. The same way that if you're fired because you had a medical condition, you can get lost wages in that situation. So there are remedies available to you. And if you truly believe that you were discriminated against, this is one of those situations where, I'll go back to my usual saying, if you think you need an employment lawyer, you probably do. I would definitely see an employment lawyer and get some advice as to whether it's something that's worth pursuing or not. You can't just let it go. If you have that sense that something is wrong, that you were discriminated against, you should definitely pursue that. And that's what human rights legislation is there to address.